Good afternoon, everybody coming in. Welcome to the webinar Counterbalance on the future of EIB. We're going to wait a few minutes to let people come in and then we'll start. Okay, very well. I imagine that other people will still keep on coming in the following minutes, but let's start. So let me all welcome you very much from Counterbalance. This is a webinar we organize with Counterbalance, but also as part of the Citizens Observatory for Green Deal Financing, which is a collaboration with Counterbalance, Bankwatch, ODG, and Recommon, and many of the national members of Bankwatch, in which we follow the main instruments for financing the Green Deal, being the recovery funds, InvestEU, the EIB, etc. Both on the contribution to social justice, tackling climate change, and also including citizens in the designing and the implementation of these EU public finances. And as part of this work, we also organize webinars to exactly to have the discussion together with decision makers and experts and NGOs. And so today we have our third webinars of a series. The first one we did on the EIB, more towards in the anticipation of the new president coming in. Then we had one on the external investments of the European Union in January, and now we have the webinar with the new president being there, looking a bit at like what can the future of the EIB hold for us. Knowing that the European Investment Bank, a bank owned by all the member states of the EU, actually has a very big potential. It finances around 80 billion in projects every year, and it's increasingly being used by policymakers as an instrument of the economic policy of the European Union. And we want to have a discussion today, as we have a new president of the EIB, the former Spanish finance minister, Nadia Calviño. Okay, what are the prospects? What is the future of the EIB, and what it interests us especially? How can it use its full potential for more and better environmental and social change? Some things that are also really interesting for us is like how can it contribute to essential public services such as affordable housing, energy, or transport, which are both important for daily needs of people, but also very important for tackling climate change. So let me briefly introduce the speakers. We have a very nice panel, I think, today. I welcome you all very much and thank you for participating. So first of all, we have Thomas Marois, who is a professor of political economy in the Department of Political Science in the McMaster University. He joins us from Canada, so for Thomas, it's morning now. And he's a director of a new research-focused public banking project. He's a leading scholar on public banks worldwide and focuses on the pro-public alternative that these banks can finance. And he's also the author of a book, Public Banks, Decarbonization, Definancialization, and Democratization. So we can already see a bit where his priorities lie. And he has won a prize for it, the Joan Robinson Prize. It's very nice. Then we have Stephen O'Driscoll. He joins us from the EIB, where he has been working for the last 15 years, if I'm right. And currently, he heads the Environmental, Climate, and Social Office. And this department helps the bank to define the policies and the standards and guidelines in these areas. And it plays an important role to the evolution of the Climate Bank roadmap, which is the climate strategy of the bank. So we will definitely be talking a bit about this. And then last, but definitely not least, we have Anna Roggenboek from Bankwatch. Bankwatch also, Anna also represents Bankwatch as a member of Counterbalance. She already works at Bankwatch since 2004. And she is the EIB campaign coordinator. And she's, we can say this amongst us, she's by far the person within the Counterbalance network that if you want to know something about EIB, you go to Anna. So that's why we definitely wanted to have her on the panel today. So let me start. So the way we do this is we do 2 rounds of questions for each speaker. Then there will be a little bit debate. And then in the end, we have 10, 15 minutes for Q&A. So I start with you, Thomas. How do you assess the current business and the governance model of the EIB? Where do you think that it has its benefits? Where are there strong points? And where do you see shortcomings in the way the bank is operating today to have a strong social and environmental impact?
Thanks, Frank, and thanks for the invitation. You know, I'm very happy to be contributing to this discussion. You know, because I think in general, the question of public banks and public development banks and multilateral development banks has been one that, let's say, has been ignored for too long, and really it's been in the last 5 at most 10 years that's in terms of the broader academic community, and aside from the good work that Counterbalance and Bankwatch is doing and so on, we haven't had much of a discussion around this, in particular around questions of governance. And I think this topic has now become part of really its center of questions of green and just transitions, just as the role of public banks and public development banks have been thrust to the forefront of this, particularly through forums like the Finance and Commons Summit that has really emerged as the forum for public banks, and the EIB has played a really important role in that. But in terms of the EIB, itself, its governance model, it's in many ways a standard sort of multilateral development governance model where its member states, through their finance ministries, are the highest governing board of the bank and sets the directions and strategies of the bank. And it's a form of democratization. But I think, there is space certainly within the EIB and within almost all multilateral development banks, and particularly national development banks as well, to broaden out that question of governance and broaden out the voices that are heard within the governing boards of these very powerful public institutions, and because the decisions they make have significant impact on countries, on communities, but also in terms of the institution itself and what kind of capacities institution like the EIB develops, what kind of support it provides for national governments, and what kind of relationships they choose to have with local communities and countries abroad, as many of these multilateral development banks reach out. So I would say, to the extent that it is governed by political entities, that from countries, there's a level of representation there, to be sure. But I think there, it would be useful for civil society organizations and academics, to begin pushing for different forms of representation within the EIB, and not just talking spaces, but pushing for changes that would have meaningful impact on the banks, draw in voices from unions, from small, medium-sized enterprises, social enterprises, from municipalities, and so on, into the governing of the bank. And in some ways, not dissimilar to what you might see in Germany with the KfW, where you have legislative representation from different sectors of society that then feed into the knowledge of the bank, the understanding, the policy frameworks and decision-making, future decision-making directions of these institutions. But at the same time, I think I think the EIB does well to draw in and speak to various forms and counterbalance, and they tend to engage quite a bit in Finance and Commons Summit. But within the actual structure of the institution, it would be also important, as we seek to globally tackle major structural problems and inequalities around gender, around wage inequality, workers, and not least climate transitions that are just, that there is the formation of specialist committees that sit within the governance structure of the institution itself. So you could see, and you can see examples around these at different public banks around the world, where you could have a binding gender committee that reviews the operations of the institution, specifically from a gender equity lens, that which then the board of governors is compelled to respond to those reports. So it's not just a report sitting on a shelf somewhere, but you can, through legal mechanisms, through requirements in the constitution of the bank, the board of governors must then respond to the directions, suggestions, criticisms, recommendations of committees like gender. You could see it on just transitions. You could see it in terms of employment and workers' rights and so on. And let me just sort of, I think there's more to be said on this in a number of different ways. I think there's some real space for the EIB and EIB Global to significantly reconsider how it draws in communities in the Global South. But also, there's some parallel discussions around this in terms of particularly Indigenous communities and marginalized communities around free, prior, and informed consent. And having binding requirements within public institutions to ensure that they have the consent of Indigenous communities in particular. And that includes in Europe, in Northern Europe, but also in its operations abroad, and to bake that into the governance frameworks and legal requirements of a really important, and let me be clear, I am an advocate of public banks generally, and I think they have enormous potential. And I think, really, I say this regularly, there is no pathway to green and just transitions that will not pass through public banks. And therefore, we have, a really important duty to comment and reflect on these institutions, and above all, on their governance structures, and question to the extent that you're a representative whose voices are being heard, and what are the binding mechanisms for accountability within that. Thank you.
Thomas, thanks a lot. So let's now move to Stephen. Actually, it would be very interesting to hear from you, what are the current EIB's priorities for improving the social and the environmental impact? We know that you play already an important role and you have the ambition to become the climate bank of the EU. But how do you see this going forward? What are changes to the priorities of these changes? Which changes in policy and business model do you think that can enable where you want to go? And finally, also, what do you think that the EIB can do to further decarbonize the operation in the projects and the counterparties that you work with?
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for inviting me to the webinar today. There's actually quite a lot in that question, so I'll do my best to try and answer. I mean, I should say before I start that our new president is engaging with EU finance ministers over the course of the coming months to assess what the future strategic priorities of the bank might be. And so this starts with an informal ECOFIN meeting today, happening in Ghent. And I understand there will be an initial press statement on tomorrow. But I think this is the start of what is likely to be a quite intense series of discussions with our shareholders over the coming months. So whatever I might say here, I wouldn't like to preempt anything that might be decided in the course of those discussions. So, but what I can say, I think, is that doing more of what we're currently doing in the green and social space and having greater impact is very much a given for us going forward. This in many ways has been behind our evolution as the EU Climate and Environment Bank. And implicit in this, and I'm thinking about your question about what our priorities might be for improving social impact and environmental impact, in particular on the social side, is going to be a very strong ongoing commitment to cohesion lending and further prioritizing financing for social infrastructure. As you know, cohesion is one of our cross-cutting objectives, and in fact, it was one of the founding missions of the bank. And the purpose of this is to make sure that our financing, properly benefits Europe's less well-developed regions, and thereby brings about a more balanced development and further integration within the EU. So, last year the group provided over 35 billion to projects in cohesion regions, which was actually nearly half of the group's total lending in the EU, which is a sizable sum. So that exceeded our target for cohesion lending, and the lending also became greener, which is interesting. So about 2/3 of that supported climate action and environmental sustainability objectives. And of course, with the green transition needing to pick up pace and likely to affect those communities and people in regions that are more dependent on carbon-intensive industries, we'll need to be working very closely with local and regional authorities, further deploying our advisory services and making sure that that stays very much front and center of what we do. And of course, we're partnering with the Commission, particularly in the third pillar of the Just Transition Mechanism, where we see a lot of that coming through as well. And it's very clear that strong social infrastructure lays at the heart of that sustainable growth and prosperity in the regions, and this is where we'll need to be applying our focus. So investment in health, in education, social and affordable housing, social enterprises and so on, these are all key for making this growth happen. And this is where we'd like to build on our good track record and bring the financial and advisory resources of the bank to bear. Then from an environmental impact perspective, we're aiming to adopt in the near future a nature positive approach where we can to our lending. And we're working very hard with the other multilateral development banks to define exactly what that means in operational terms. And I'm sure you've read the set of common principles that the MDB community released at COP last year to that effect. So it describes the general approach that we're taking there. And there's a lot of work to be done actually this year in, as I say, defining what that means. We're also looking to support increased support for sectors with the greatest co-benefits from both biodiversity and climate and so on. So in areas such as water, sanitation, forestry, oceans and agriculture, and much of that would actually align our financing with the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And these are areas where we do actually already have a good track record. So we're excited about that. On what we need to do to change our business model and policy, I thought about that question quite hard, and I do actually believe we have the policy framework in place, which gives us a really good platform to build on. Firstly, we have the Climate Bank Roadmap, which you mentioned, and that allows us to build policy support for the three interlinked crises, so climate, environment, and social. And then secondly, we have our ESSF, which was approved in 2022, and along with that, the updated set of standards. And in those, we adopt sustainable finance as our operating model, which allows us to look at projects both from a safeguarding and a positive impact perspective. And they also drive social inclusion and human rights commitments across the whole of the group, which I know are important for you and the audience here today. I want to say our business model is changing too, because we don't just finance large infrastructure projects anymore. We lend, we blend, and we advise. A good proportion of our lending is through intermediaries, so we're making sure that it is reaching smaller financial beneficiaries, and we're seeing an increase in number of thematic windows as well in our loans. And one example of that I just wanted to highlight here was the impact incentive loan that we afforded to UniCredit Bank in Serbia last year. So this is a credit line that aims at creating job opportunities and enhancing employment standards for women, youth, and people from vulnerable groups. So it does that through an additional feature of performance-based financial reward via an investment grant, an area investment grant. And it also has technical assistance and help for preparation and implementation of projects as well. And we're also kind of ramping up other product types as well. So sector-based lending, sustainability-linked bonds, and other products. And this will really allow us to support partner countries in particular delivering on their climate commitments. And one interesting thing that we're doing at the moment is looking at a debt for climate swap deal in Barbados. So this is really helping those that are most in need without putting an additional fiscal burden on the country. Just very quickly, Frank, because I know I'm running out of time. Your last point about decarbonising. I mean, last year was a record year for us in green financing terms, 49 billion across the group as a whole. And the good thing for us, I think, as an EU body is that we have the taxonomy to guide us, and we're also aligning with the EU Green Bond Standard. We have our path framework, which looks at the Paris alignment credentials of our borrowers, so looking beyond the projects. And under that, of course, as you know, we require both decarbonisation and resilience plans from our counterparts. But we can always do more, as I say, and it will be interesting to see what comes out of the priority discussion. We're looking to ramp up in all of those areas. You referred, I think, to the review of the CBR. So that's happening next year. So there'll be another version of the CBR, whatever that might be called, that will run from the period 25 through to 30. And we're very keen to have, full and proper stakeholder consultation in that. So we'll set up a series of consultations with the likes of yourself and other interested stakeholders. So in overall terms, I'd say we're staying the course. And we're aiming to improve our impact from a climate, environment, and social perspective as we go forward. Sorry, I've gone a bit over time.
Okay, thank you for extensive answer, Stephen. Now, Anya, to you. So as Stephen was already saying, like the EIB is reaching its own climate targets, but maybe it's interesting to have your vision on. Stephen also mentioned the Climate Bank Roadmap and the ESSF, and maybe it's interesting to see, like, okay, is this the good news? Is that it's it, or what are the issues that are still pending there? What still needs to change? Is the policy framework there, or what should change if we really want to have like a really good environmental and social impact of the EIB?
Yes, thank you, Frank. Yeah, indeed, I actually was checking recently on the EIB achievements in that respect. So the bank indeed actually exceeded its climate and environmental targets by making more actually than half of its annual lending in line with this objective. So I also checked that, for instance, in the EU, the climate action alone just reached almost 58% of the EIB lending, and outside the EU also was significant because it reached 46%. Yeah, so indeed. To me, it seems like this is indeed like a follow-up of what was said about the adoption of climate bank roadmap. Though I have sometimes, some doubts about this accounting, because looking into how projects are classified, like that, sometimes a huge electricity distribution loans or or railway reconstruction of railway lines. These are all classified as 100 climate action. But I don't think this is like a major, yes, impact on achieving this target. I think we also must acknowledge the fossil fuel phase out by the EIB. Here, also the EIB stands out, I think, among its peers, which can definitely maybe follow the suit, so hopefully. So I think generally the impact is positive in terms of the bank contribution to decarbonization of the EU economy. But I think there are still some questions that that can be raised. For example, whether in a given context, let's say in the particular country context, and the country's decarbonization plans, whether the EIB indeed contributes to the activities that are most transitional, that have most transitional impact. This is the question about the bank's additionality, about financing projects with the highest impact, and cooperation with entities that indeed need this support from the EIB as a development bank. So here, I think we can acknowledge that in the that certain technologies are mature, or that certain entities perhaps may receive support from other sources, and this is in fact statutory obligation of the EIB to provide this provide additionality. We see that there is well, definitely, I mean, this was mentioned, that the bank should not only support infrastructure investments, which provide a base for like a commercial activities, but also prioritize those contributing strongly to social cohesion. So I'm very glad to hear that this is also made priority at the EIB, and the EIB is seeking to increase and to strengthen this. So this would be including just transition and protection from climate change effect. Maybe, I mean, this agenda is still very visible, especially, for instance, in the EIB Global Strategic Roadmap. The agenda for supporting growth is very visible, and only then, you know, mitigating the negative effects of this growth to some extent. Actually, in the EIB Global Impact Report, the social cohesion contribution is pretty insignificant. So I think perhaps this is indeed good that the EIB plans to prioritize social cohesion, and I can only, you know, call for also looking into this element outside the EU. So not only, you know, not only reaching to low-hanging fruit. I'm not saying this is the only case. I think we don't, as a civil society, we don't have a full picture. You know, I can only say, for instance, in Poland, where I live, I can see the bank supporting various activities in the climate action. But what stands out very visibly is continuing support to monopoly energy corporates, and this support, sometimes I have really doubt whether it was needed from the EIB. And perhaps, you know, these companies like Orlen, for instance, could easily get financial resources elsewhere, where EIB could support sectors where its financial additionality could be bigger. Then I was also concerned about the changes to the path framework, allowing continuation for supporting of say polluters which continue projects detrimental to climate. And also the fact that I think the implementation of this path framework and in terms of certain criteria and obligations for corporates to provide EIB with decarbonization plans. The implementation is not what I, for instance, expected, because I thought the EIB would be more also reviewing these plans and ensuring that they are indeed in line with the criteria established in the SPRAT framework, which overall we considered as a great a part of the climate strategy and also achievement, because it seems that no one else has this the similar approach among the multilateral development banks. So eventually, I think more transparency should be definitely needed. Also, we, I don't know how much time I have, but the last few words about the area which is also the EIB public policy goal, which is the investments in urban sustainable cities and regions. And Bankwatch also was looking into this sector. We believe that this is where transitional investments can indeed take place and have a great contribution to decarbonization. But we also see that there is like a systemic issue with spatial planning and also urban development strategies. And we see that definitely the bank tries to support this municipal investments through different type of operations, but there is a huge lack of transparency in terms of what projects are indeed financed, whether these money are really directed towards activities like towards the needed investments in public transportation, in municipal level waste management, circular economy, also in public services and public transportation. So we would definitely encourage the bank to be more transparent, and also, as I said, in terms of what is finance and actually where this finance is going, to which regions and which cities. We can see that perhaps because of the lack of transparency, but we can see that definitely there are many examples in Poland or in Italy of the EIB's investments in urban areas, but this would definitely be needed also in other parts of Europe. Therefore, there needs to be, I can only call for a more transparency, so we are also able to assess it and to hold the bank accountable for these operations. Thank you.
You're on mute, Frank.
Not on mute. Can you hear me? You hear me? Okay, you hear me, right? Okay, fine. Sorry. For the second round of questions, I see that everybody has really many things to say, which is very good. But in order that we can have a little bit of debate, in the second round, let's try to be a bit more concise. Thomas, back to you. Stephen was talking about the importance of social infrastructure, and you made a very interesting publication last year on the potential of public banks to finance public services. What do you think that the EIB could do to support further the development of these services?
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, so this is this is a really important question, and Anna brought this up, and I'm sure Stephen is keenly attuned to this question, because the issue of the public sector and public services and relationships within and across different public entities that have a lot of power and money and capacity, but also are, you know, in terms of public services, or on the ground, have a lot of knowledge and have a lot of impact in their environment, is really significant. And in many ways, investments in the public sector, as Anna was mentioning, things like transportation, energy, retrofitting of existing public buildings, of course, healthcare, water, sanitation, are really significant projects, and they can have a major impact on climate, but also then knock-on effects in terms of communities, health, jobs, employment, resilience, you know, the big question of adaptation. And so in many ways, you know, I'm increasingly frustrated with the continued push, not necessarily by the EIB, but in general at high levels of you know, in multilateral forums, for more and more public-private partnerships, and significant energy, you know, being pushed into what more can we do for private investment in infrastructure, what more can we do to, you know, set the terms, to encourage more private investment, and how can we use more public money for that, so that the transition that we need in big structural areas like infrastructure and so on, can be realized as a matter of profit, when in fact we can do much of this and really important, significant transformations at the pace, scale, and on the terms appropriate if we spend a little more time on public-public collaborations. And certainly the EIB is active in this area. No doubt, and I encourage that. And you know, we did a study of public banks and public water provisioning, came out last year, and EIB is very active, and it's active in many ways in terms of public-public collaboration. So, you know, partnering with other national level development banks like the Dutch Water Bank, but also recently I saw, you know, a really interesting project with the Council of Europe Development Bank for water provisioning in Crete, where you develop collaboration between public entities that can advance massive and, you know, highly impactful infrastructure projects, water, sanitation, transport, energy, municipal infrastructure, schools, and so on, as a matter of policy. And you set the terms that are appropriate. You can build in a lot of, you know, what Stephen would say in terms of, if I can't remember your wording now, Stephen. I don't want to put words into your mouth. But performance-based sort of, you know, benefits in terms of if municipalities do better in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions, or in terms of accessibility or equity in terms of water, that then, you know, you can roll back the cost of the loans or certain benefits and so on. And these are, you know, relatively tried and true methods that exist, you know, across the public banking sector at the national level, maybe in the multilateral level, but we hear relatively little about this. And, you know, you will see dedicated PPP research institutes at the World Bank and multilateral level, but I'm yet to see a public-public collaboration research institute that's funded to the extent that we put money into PPPs. And frankly, I think this is shameful. when we know that we need to do this transformation faster and better, and in ways that are impacting communities. And there's so much low-hanging fruit around this. So, you know, and so that's much of what I'm working on now. That's really the initial thrust of the public banking project, is to begin excavating more of these narratives, more of these successful stories of what the public sector and public banks are already doing successfully in terms of collaborations between multilateral development banks, between multilateral development banks and national level development banks. And we did a study for the Finance and Commons Summit and the French Development Agency last year on this. We're following up on it. Europe stood out in terms of that MDB-NDB relationship for a number of reasons, not least of which a common currency, which makes it relatively easy for that kind of collaboration. But more needs to be done between the North and the South, and particularly in the cost of capital and exchange rate risks. But then also we need to know more about national level public development banks cooperating with other national level development banks, and then the whole gamut of public development banks, multilateral, national, subnational, and their relationships with other public sector entities, water, sanitation, transportation, energy, the list could go on and on. But there is a whole world of already existing solutions that capacity at the public level that we just simply have not dedicated time or effort and research into understanding, excavating those, and making them better. There's no necessary relationship between an institution being public and it being good. Right? There's always ways that we can advance and think innovatively and creatively to how to make our existing public institutions better, certainly more accountable, transparent, democratic, representative, but also impactful. And when you're partnering with other public sector institutions, then there is a space there for this question of sober discussions. You can be driven by policy. There is greater opportunities for accountability, and the cost of capital just falls because you're not having to respond to the demands of shareholder returns and reduced risk in terms of long-term investments and so on. So that's ultimately the thrust of that publication in terms of the benefits around public collaborations, the way of building in these investments as a matter of policy, not profit, and simply the fact that we need to know more about this because it's being done really, really well in a number of cases. So I think that's my pitch for more research and knowledge and people jumping into this question of let's understand what these public banks are doing in collaboration with other public entities. Thank you.
Yeah, Stephen, I will give you the opportunity to respond to this. I think actually that the question I prepared is almost not necessary anymore. With what Thomas said, there's a lot of room for this. You already do some of it. On the other hand, de-risking the private sector is something that the EIB is really very vocal about, that it wants to push this, and we see it in a lot of projects too. So how do you see this, the potential of what Thomas is talking about of these public operations and the gains that could come of this and the potential to develop this more in the future for the EIB?
Well, I'd just like to thank Thomas actually for giving the bank a bit of a shout out there. I mean, public collaboration is an area in which we work, and I'm just thinking of one concrete example of that recently is an investment platform we've set up with BGK, so that's the Polish Development Bank, actually to support the social and affordable housing projects in all the different municipalities across Poland. I mean, I don't think there is necessarily a contradiction between supporting the private sector and investing in these types of projects, because I think the private sector does have an important role to play, but I think it's just about making sure that the balance is right. And I'd be really kind of interested to contribute where we can as a public bank to Thomas's research work there. I'm not sure where you are in that, Thomas, but very happy to speak with you. I mean, as a group, we've been providing substantial support to just thinking about the social and affordable housing sector there. For over 25 years now across the EU. I think on average it's about 1.3 billion a year we've financed in the past 5 years. So we've got a range of instruments. Thomas alluded to some of them there, working together with the cities, with the municipality, with the municipal housing companies, as well as the national and local promotional banks, and dedicated financial institutions set up by government as well. And your original question, Frank, asked about the transport sector and the energy sectors as well. And we finance. I mean, transport is our biggest green sector. Well, it certainly was last year and has been for a couple of years. And we finance on average about 10 billion per year of green and innovative solutions in the mobility sector. And just one impact indicator we have is the number of additional trips, passenger trips that this can bring about. And there were 254 million passenger trips through that 10 billion per year, 10 billion last year, which is fantastic. I'm thinking from a new metro line in Athens to building a new bus rapid transit in the capital of Nicaragua. We really are promoting sustainable collective transport by encouraging a shift to public transportation, enhancing urban mobility, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as pollution levels in the city as well, which is important. So, and that last example there, the Nicaraguan one, was actually an example of how we're implementing our fragility and conflict sensitivity approach in practice as well, because we included there a lot of additional community consultation and participation mechanisms. There was some additional advisory for traffic safety and so on. So this is another area that we're trying to open out into the more conflict-affected countries. In the energy space, over the last decade, we've channeled around over 100, I think it's about 110 billion into the energy sector for clean energy projects around the world. And these are obviously now helping Europe in particular weather the crisis triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then for energy efficient homes in Germany, through to sustainable heating in Brno, Czech Republic, all the way to innovative projects such as e-methanol, as well as battery storage projects under the EU Catalyst Partnership. We're working with a really broad range of players, including local governments, businesses and foundations, to really enhance our sustainable energy solutions. So we're doing a lot, and as I say, Thomas would be very keen to speak to you on your research work, so do get in touch. You're on mute, Frank. Still on mute.
You don't hear me?
We can now, yeah.
Okay, so there's like a delay when the mute stops. Okay, thank you, Steven. So now, finally, let me give the floor to Anya. What I suggest, given the timing, because everybody's giving very interesting answers, is that we let Anya speak and then we give the floor to the audience. We have some time to ask. We have questions from them. So Anya, let's go back to the beginning. Thomas was talking about governance. How do you think that for the environmental and the social issues that you raised, for this to improve, what do you think that has to change? You already mentioned the transparency, that this is important. What do you think that has to change in the transparency and governance mechanisms so that as a civil society we can participate in the improvement of that we see that is needed? Yes, please go.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there was also a review of the environmental and social policy and standards pretty recently, and I think, I mean, the EIB has in place this environmental and social sustainability framework. which I think is a good base for an accurate and thorough due diligence. But what I would suggest is to enhance the implementation. First of all, I mean, we have not seen so far updated procedures in terms of like how the bank conducts in its due diligence. So this is something that was either not updated or it's just not public. And yeah, definitely the implementation of these standards we would like to see to be enhanced. I see that perhaps there is the over-reliance on country systems and the borrower capacities, and especially this is problematic outside the EU. With the quality of environmental assessments and stakeholder engagement not always up to what is required. So I think there should be a more thorough assessment from the EIB, and also more transparency in terms of identified gaps and corresponding action plans. This is more transparent now, where EIB co-finances projects with others, and where not, then it's not that transparent on the EIB side. So like starting also from communicating more clearly, like what standards apply and what type of due diligence, what activities under the due diligence were undertaken by the EIB. Also, yeah, like in terms of, for instance, the investments in urban areas, which is the priority of the EIB, we see that these often lack of public participation. Because these investments are considered, you know, having only positive impacts, but there are also pretty significant social impacts which are often neglected. And in case that, if, for instance, there isn't a proper spatial planning, if these investments are not part of like a more strategic integrated strategy, then they often go without public participation in urban areas. So I think this is an area that needs more focus and improvements. Also, we see EIB signing of cooperation agreements with, for instance, countries on development of their, let's say, renewable energy sectors, or in particular, so hydrogen programs. But this is not followed by a declaration on conducting strategic environmental assessment. So, so this is also something that concerns me. And the question about transparency and public participation, I think on general, this transparency needs improvement at the EIB, at least to standards represented by multilateral development banks. Giving citizens real access to contributing to decision-making process at the EIB. And here we have a judgment from the European courts from last year, and then followed by EU Ombudsman decision from November last year, saying that EIB's decision to finance a project, support a project, is a decision, it's an administrative act based on environmental legislation, And therefore, I mean, the situation where we have now that there is only little information from the EIB on these projects before a decision is made, and definitely there isn't information from the EIB's due diligence on environmental and social issues is not disclosed until decision, until approval, or sometimes even until signature. This is a practice which needs to be changed. So we hope the EIB will also take these recent developments into consideration and change this practice. So at the moment, currently 40% of projects are not even disclosed on the EIB pipeline prior to board approval, and this is according to the official statistics. So there is a lot to do on transparency. And finally, also access to effective grievance mechanism. The EIB has in place complaints mechanism, but it needs a review and needs to be aligned with the effectiveness criteria of United Nations business guiding principles on business and human rights, because currently it lacks effectiveness. This mechanism is non-transparent, and it deals with cases for really long time. And I can see, and actually I observe the pipeline of cases which are brought to the EIB complaints mechanism, and there are lots of complaints from outside the EU, where for these the citizens of our partner countries, this is let's say the only mechanism that they can access in terms of the EIB operation. Yeah, so I think this would be my key suggestions for where EIB can actually improve in terms of its environmental and social due diligence and transparency.
Frank, maybe I can respond to just a couple of Anna's questions there, points. I mean, I think, Anna, you've raised these points in the letter that you sent to President Calviño. So we'll have a look at those. But the couple of transparency issues you're raising there, I mean, you're well aware of what the European Ombudsman has pointed out on the release of environmental information. We're looking at that now. We're deciding how to respond. We're due to respond officially to the Ombudsman, I think, in early May. So we're working on that now. And of course, the biomass case brought about a change in position on internal review. So we're having to accommodate the internal review requirement now. And I think we're going to go live with a link on our website where those requesting an internal review can actually formally make that request. And those two reasons are actually why we're still not quite able to finalize our procedures, our ENS due diligence procedures, because we're trying to incorporate the outcome of those two things into our final set of procedures, but hopefully we'll get to that very soon. Sorry, Frank. Still can't hear you, Frank. Yep.
You don't hear me?
We can now.
Wow, this is amazing. Sorry for these technological issues. I also forwarded you two questions that came from one of the people in the audience, persons in the audience, on the process of in project. Maybe you can you see these questions? Maybe you can address those as well. Not, I can summarize them.
I think they're quite long questions, so I don't know whether we can actually get.
I think
back
maybe I can summarize it. I think one specific one is there's a question on there's a internet implementation problem list when there's a promoter that doesn't comply correctly with the rules, and maybe you can explain a bit more how this works, because the person that asked the question definitely sees some issues with this.
I would need to look into that, Frank. I don't want to give a half-baked answer in what is it, 20 seconds we've got left. So perhaps we'll come back to you on that. I haven't even read the question yet, so I need to give it some thought.
Maybe we can take one more question from the floor. But can we maybe say that, Stephen, that you will answer in writing to this question, that we mail it to you, and that you will answer this question in writing? Then there's a question from Hélène Zuckerman, who has her hand. Maybe she can ask her a question. If to give the floor. You can give her, no? Normally you can give her. Can she write her question? God.
Maybe if she puts it in writing, Frank.
Yeah, maybe Ellie can write her question.
If it's for us, we can go back in writing as well. So unfortunately, I do have to pop off.
Yes, we all have to. Okay, I'm very sorry that we're not able to go into the questions that were asked. I suggest we get back to you, that we do the questions in writing, and that we get back to you. So our time is up. But I want to thank everybody for a very interesting debate. I think there was definitely a lot of remaining issues left, but it's interesting for us to see that there's willingness to engage further on this, and that seems to be prospect to develop further some of these public services that we see as very important. Okay, then please allow me to thank you very much for your participation and wish you a very good rest of the day. All right. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Meet you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.